But it was clear they were there as boy toys for pay. And the first reaction I had was one of kind of tingly excitement. Oh my God, watching these handsome guys in the pool. You mean I can have that if I'm only willing to pay? Hi, this is Mike Balaban. Welcome to another episode of BAMMER Talks. Today I want to share with you a slice of life from the 80s on how the other half lives, the very wealthy. And what made me think of it is I'm watching a Netflix series, a new series called Royal Pains, about an emergency room doctor in New York City who gets fired and is out of work and suddenly gets an opportunity to go out to the Hamptons for the summer, the Hamptons being the wealthy enclave outside of Manhattan, 2 or 3 hours to the east. He gets an opportunity to go out there and become a concierge doctor, attending to the needs of the wealthy people one by one in their homes. And I'm enjoying the series, but it triggered in my memory my experience of what the summer of 1986 in Southampton was like, which I'll share with you now. I had been becoming friendly with a guy named Ken in New York, who I was very attracted to and hoped something might develop with. He was the heir to a local family-owned bus company fortune, and nothing ever really did happen with him except we became friends. But we both ended up out in the Hamptons for the summer, and while we were out there, I hung around with Ken hoping something might spark, and it didn't. But he ended up inviting me to a friend of his who lived in the Hamptons full-time named Robert. Now, I was 34, and Robert was probably the same age or 3 or 4 years older. And he was very well established in the Hamptons community as a famous and well-paid landscape architect. And his best friend, to whom he was a confidant, was the very wealthy heiress to the Johnson & Johnson family fortune. And she was married to a guy who was a Broadway producer. And arguably they had a happy marriage, everything was normal. But in fact, what really happened is how I'll describe it in the following story. While I was hanging out with Ken and getting to know Robert, it was clear Robert was attracted to me. And while I didn't really feel reciprocally the same, he was a nice looking guy, and I'll go out on a date with you. And so he invited me a week or two later on the weekend when I returned from New York City to the Hamptons to accompany him to a very lavish, outdoor, huge socialite party, for lack of a better description, on a lawn in a huge estate on Gin Lane, which is the wealthiest street in Southampton. The homes there are all hidden behind tall hedges. And there were valet parking that greeted us when we arrived and took our cars from us. There were fountains everywhere spewing champagne. There were waiters serving canapes and other hors d'oeuvres and drinks. And I had to prepare for that weekend by making sure I went back to New York and got the appropriate set of clothing for that kind of fancy set. I brought a blazer and slacks and nice loafers, and I dressed for the occasion. So when I got there that evening and met Robert, and he'd already explained how the evening would go, and there was kind of an assumption that we might end up back in his place afterwards, which would be the real date. I found out that Robert, as the hostess's best friend, had to sit next to her at the front table, the head table, as it were. Meanwhile, people were not invited to this party as single guests. Everyone was part of a couple. So I had to sit with someone. Fortunately, there was a woman whose business or banker husband was traveling and couldn't get back in time for the party. So she became my arm candy, or I became hers. She was my date. And we had a nice time that evening, hanging out, talking, chatting, enjoying whatever the entertainment was. The food was delicious. The setting was amazing. When the party was over, I reunited with Robert. We hung out for a while, and then when everyone was separating, I went back to his place with him. And we spent the night. We had sex. I don't remember much about it. We may have done some substances like cocaine or not, hard to remember. And then he explained how the next day was going to go when we woke up. There was going to be a pool party, which the heiress's husband, the Broadway producer, was throwing. But it would not involve the heiress or her friends. It was just the Broadway producer and 8 or 10 of his male, wealthy, married to women friends who happened to be closeted gay men. And it was an amazing occurrence to watch this happen. Everything looked normal, but in point of fact, they had secret lives that their wives didn't know about. The other thing was they had a plane arranged to fly from Manhattan to the Hamptons with the brunch supplies from Zabar's, a very famous delicatessen, so that these mostly Jewish men, I believe, could have their gefilte fish and their herring and their lox. I enjoyed the brunch and the food. The thing that stood out that was also different was there were about a half dozen other guests. And these were all unanimously young, handsome, well-built, some muscular guys in their 20s who were clearly there for the benefit and the pleasure of the people who were guests at the party. And I don't know what, if anything, happened afterwards between any of them and any of the hosts, but it was clear they were there as boy toys for pay. And the first reaction I had was one of kind of tingly excitement. Oh my God, watching these handsome guys in the pool who I craved physically. You mean I can have that if I'm only willing to pay? But then the next thought that crossed my mind was, well, yeah, but they would only be there because you were paying them. And the moment you stopped, they'd be gone. And that's just not the kind of interactions and relationships I've ever wanted or had in my life. So that was it. We ended the brunch, separated, went on our different ways. I stayed in touch with Robert. I probably saw him once or twice more that summer. And then one day, out of the blue, Ken calls me up with some shocking news. Robert had been driving to or from Manhattan in his convertible Mercedes-Benz coupe when he had a sudden heart attack and had to pull over to the side of the road where he died. And it seems like, from my memory, that the likely cause was an excess of ingested cocaine, which he and I may have done the one night we were together, but I never do anything to excess, and I have a hard time believing that anybody could allow that to happen. But it does happen. So anyway, that was my summer in the Hamptons. That was my ritzy, exclusive, well-to-do, posh experience behind the gates and the hedges of the wealthy on Gin Lane. Meanwhile, I was back in my 2-bedroom rental apartment with my 2 roommates, enjoying a rather quiet summer by comparison. Have you ever had anything happen like that? Thank you for watching and listening. This has been Mike Balaban with another BAMMER Talks.